Philadelphia news, team of my heart.
You ready for this? Because what's happening in Philly right now is not just a setback, it's a full-blown crisis. Joel Embiid's future, uncertain. Paul George, looking like a massive mistake. Sixers cap space, completely locked up. And now, with the NBA's new rules punishing big spenders, the Sixers are trapped, facing brutal choices that could reshape the franchise for the next decade. Sixers news. Trade rumors, everything is on the table. Could the team actually trade Embiid? Should they move Maxey instead? This isn't just about this season, this is about survival. Stick around, because what comes next will define the Sixers for years. You knew this season was going to be challenging, but what's unfolding is something no one saw coming. Joel Embiid shut down. Paul George regressing. A Sixers team that once looked like a contender now staring down a future that's anything but promising. And here's the brutal truth, you can't just hope your way out of this mess. The NBA's new collective bargaining agreement has made sure of that. Going over the second apron? That's a death sentence for roster flexibility. No sign and trades. No salary aggregation in deals. No access to mid-level exceptions. And the Sixers? They're already drowning in bad contracts. It's not just about the numbers, it's about what those numbers represent. Joel Embiid is owed $69 million in 2028 to 29. By then, will he even be able to stay on the floor? Will he ever return to MVP form? You've already seen the warning signs, the injuries, the missed games, the uncertainty. And then there's Paul George, $211 million over 4 years. He turns 35 in May and is playing some of the worst basketball of his career. And somehow, Daryl Morey gave him a player option worth $56.5 million. That means, in 2028, the Sixers could be paying a declining 38-year-old Paul George and an aging, injury-riddled Joel Embiid nearly $130 million combined. That's not a contender. That's a disaster. And what about Tyrese Maxey? The only Sixer playing at an elite level. The 24-year-old is locked in on a max contract. But here's the issue, you can't build around him properly with two unmovable, bloated deals sitting on the books. That leaves one terrifying question. How do you fix this? The obvious answer is to trade Embiid and George. But good luck finding a taker. Teams aren't lining up to absorb aging stars on massive contracts. Any team that would take them would likely demand draft picks in return, not offer them up. That's where the Sixers are stuck. If they ride this out, they're looking at years of mediocrity, praying that Embiid and George can somehow defy age and injuries. But what if that doesn't happen? What if this is just the beginning of a painful decline? There is one wild card, the draft. The Oklahoma City Thunder own the Sixers' first-round pick unless it lands in the top 6. That means lottery luck is the only way Philly keeps it. And if, by some miracle, they land a top prospect like Cooper Flagg, that's a reset button. That's hope. But let's be real, the odds aren't in their favor. And that's why there's one more nuclear option. Trading Maxey instead. It sounds insane, right? The one young, elite talent you have, gone? But if the Sixers can land multiple future draft picks and young assets in return, they could set themselves up for the post-Embiid, post-George era in the late 2020s, when those contracts finally come off the books. It's the kind of move no fan wants to see. But what's the alternative? 5 more years of disappointment? Watching Embiid and George break down while Maxey wastes his prime in an impossible situation? You tell me. If you were running the Sixers, what would you do? Trade Embiid, George, Maxey, or hold on and hope for a miracle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You know the situation is bad when even the long-term future feels uncertain. The Sixers aren't just dealing with an underwhelming season. They're staring down years of potential stagnation. You've seen how the NBA punishes teams that spend recklessly. And right now, Philadelphia is caught in a financial stranglehold with no clear way out. The contracts of Joel Embiid and Paul George are so massive that they don't just limit flexibility, they completely suffocate it. This isn't about one bad signing or a single unlucky injury. This is about a franchise that has backed itself into a corner and is now looking for an escape route that might not even exist. You've watched Embiid dominate when healthy, but that's the problem when healthy. The reality is, you can't count on him to stay on the floor for a full season anymore. You heard it from him directly, he might never play back-to-back games again. That's not a temporary setback. That's a fundamental shift in what he can give you moving forward. And with his contract locked in through 2029, you're left wondering just how much production you'll actually get for that $69 million in the final year of his deal. It's not a question of whether Embiid is still a great player. It's whether his body will even allow him to contribute at a level that justifies that kind of investment. And the worst part? You know how this story tends to end. Big men with chronic injuries rarely age well in the NBA. The decline is often sudden and irreversible. Then there's George, whose deal somehow looks even worse. At 34 years old, he's not just struggling, he's visibly losing a step. And that's a terrifying sight for a player whose game has always relied on smooth athleticism and two-way versatility. His shooting has been erratic. His defense isn't what it once was. And the burst that made him such a dangerous scorer is fading. This is year one of a 4-year deal. What does he look like at 36 or 37? You know the answer. And it's not pretty. What's even more frustrating is that this was avoidable. George didn't have a long line of suitors demanding a max contract with a player option. Yet the Sixers handed it to him anyway. Now, you're left with a player who will likely decline each season, but whose contract only gets harder to move as time goes on. Meanwhile, Maxey is playing the best basketball of his life. And instead of building around him with a balanced, modern roster, the Sixers are stuck trying to work around to aging stars whose contracts weigh down any hopes of a quick turnaround. Maxey deserves better. You know it. And if you're being honest, he probably knows it too. The question is, what can you actually do about it? Because if the Sixers don't act soon, they risk wasting the prime years of the only young star they have. And if they wait too long, they might not have a choice anymore. You've considered the trade possibilities, but they're not promising. Embiid's value isn't what it used to be. Teams see the injuries, the missed games, the enormous salary. How many front offices are really going to take that on without asking for additional assets in return? And if the Sixers have to attach picks just to move Embiid, is it even worth it? The same goes for George. If he continues to decline, his contract becomes an anchor, and by the time he's entering his final year, he might not have any trade value left at all. That's why you have to at least consider the uncomfortable option, the one that nobody wants to talk about. If the Sixers can't move Embiid or George for legitimate assets, then flipping Maxey for a collection of draft picks and young talent might be the only way to rebuild properly. It's a gut-wrenching decision. But would you rather spend the next 5 years watching this team fight for low playoff seeds with no real shot at a title? Then there's the draft, which presents the one true wild card in all of this. You know, how valuable a top 6 pick could be in a year where a generational talent like Cooper Flagg is available. But the Sixers don't control their own fate. Their pick belongs to Oklahoma City unless the lottery gods intervene. If they land in the top 6, everything changes. Suddenly, there's a new foundation to build around, a fresh start that doesn't require gutting the roster in painful ways. But what if they don't? What if the pick conveys to the Thunder and the Sixers are left with nothing? Then you're right back where you started, only with even fewer options moving forward. It all comes down to one fundamental truth. The Sixers are running out of time. Every season that passes with this roster construction is another wasted opportunity. You can't afford to sit back and hope for things to magically improve, because they won't. Embiid's health won't suddenly stabilize. George won't suddenly regain his prime form. The NBA's salary cap rules won't suddenly become more forgiving. The Sixers have to make a move before the situation gets even worse. Because if they don't, they risk spending the rest of the decade as an expensive, aging, middle-of-the-pack team with no path forward. You know what's at stake here? This isn't just about making a move, it's about avoiding a complete collapse. The Sixers are at a crossroads, and every possible path comes with serious consequences. Stick with the current roster, and you risk wasting Tyrese Maxey's best years while watching Joel Embiid and Paul George decline. Try to trade one of them, and you might find out the rest of the league values them far less than you do. But wait too long, and the decision will be made for you, because once those contracts become completely unmovable, there's no way out. The worst thing you can do is nothing. You've seen teams hesitate before, hoping for things to turn around. On their own, it never works. The Sixers have to be proactive, even if that means making a move that feels painful in the short term. You can't just keep running it back and expecting a different result. If Embiid's body can't hold up, if George keeps declining, if there's no realistic path to adding new talent, then what's the endgame here? Another first-round exit? A few more years of mediocrity before the inevitable rebuild? That's not a plan, that's just stalling. And the longer you stall, the worse the situation becomes. You've thought about the lottery, the one flicker of hope that could change everything. But you also know how slim the odds are. If the Sixers don't land in the top 6, their pick belongs to Oklahoma City, and suddenly there's no lifeline at all. That's why you can't build your future around luck. You have to take control of the situation before it spirals out of reach. And if that means moving Maxey for massive haul of draft picks and young talent, you have to consider it. You don't want to, but what's the alternative? Holding onto him while this roster crumbles around him? Watching him hit his prime on a team that's stuck in neutral? It's a brutal decision. But if it sets you up for long-term success, it might be the only real option left. You know what happens if you don't act. The Sixers will become one of those teams you hate watching, a franchise clinging to the past. While the rest of the league moves forward, that's not what you want. You want a team that can actually compete. A team that isn't weighed down by bad contracts and aging stars. You want to see a real plan, not just wishful thinking. Right now, that plan doesn't exist. But it has to, because if the Sixers don't make a move soon, they'll be stuck in a nightmare with no way out. So what do you think? If you were in charge, would you trade Embiid, George, or even Maxey to reset the franchise? Or would you roll the dice and hope this roster finds a way to make it work? Let me know in the comments, because this is a decision that could shape the next decade of Sixers basketball. And if you want to stay ahead of every Sixers news and trade update, you know what to do. Subscribe and turn on the notifications, because the next move this team makes could change everything. Don't miss it.